On an ordinary August afternoon in rural Arkansas, a young nurse stepped out of her home for what should have been a simple jog down roads she'd known her entire life.
Search for a missing Jackson County woman involving multiple law enforcement agencies now, and it continues. 25-year-old Sydney Sutherland was last seen jogging off Highway 18. Here's her photograph.
She was a firecracker. She was sassy. She was loving. She was caring, compassionate.
Walked over to him and I said, "Quake, can you tell me anything? Was Sydney doing? You know, did you see anything unusual? Did you meet anybody unusual?" He goes, "No, she was just running." I said, "You don't have anything you can tell me?" "No, she was just running." And he just kind of gave me a little hug.
He gave you a hug?
Gave me a hug.
What did that feel like in that moment?
It was something felt odd. I walked back over to the group and I was like, something's wrong.
Within hours, her disappearance would mobilize hundreds of searchers across 4 counties. But the person pretending to help find her was the very man who'd taken her life. This is the story of Sydney Sutherland, a tragedy that exposed how evil can hide behind a friendly face in the quietest of places, and how a community refused to let her memory fade into silence. Grubbs, Arkansas sits in Jackson County, a place where generations of families have built their lives on farming and faith. With barely 300 residents, it's the kind of town where locked doors feel unnecessary and strangers are rare. This was Sydney Sutherland's world, and she was woven deeply into its fabric. At 25, Sydney embodied the warmth that small towns are built on. The youngest child of Maggie and Dion Sutherland, she'd grown up alongside 2 older brothers who watched over her with fierce protectiveness. Her relationship with her mother went beyond typical bonds. They were genuine best friends who spoke multiple times daily and shared nearly everything. Friends described Sydney as someone with an infectious smile that could light up any room. Her nieces adored her, calling her Aunt Sassy, a nickname that captured her playful spirit. Sydney worked as a licensed practical nurse at Unity Health Harris Medical Center in Newport, a role that perfectly suited her compassionate nature. Her high school yearbook quote revealed her philosophy: "The meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away." She lived those words daily, always knowing exactly what someone needed before they asked. Her best friend Jordan later reflected that Sydney possessed an almost supernatural ability to understand people. Sydney shared a home with her boyfriend, and her daily routine included regular workouts. Exercise wasn't just a hobby, but a fundamental part of how she maintained her mental and physical health. She loved walking her dogs, shopping trips with friends, and the simple pleasure of spending time with family. By mid-August of 2020, Sydney and her family had just returned from a relaxing vacation to Destin, Florida. Life felt normal, peaceful, full of promise. August 19th began unremarkably. The day after returning from vacation, Sydney visited the gym for an hour-long training session. Security footage from her Ring camera captured her arriving home in workout clothes, unpacking from the trip, organizing her space. She stopped by her mother's house to drop off some mail they'd collected while away. During that visit, Sydney mentioned wanting to bake something sweet and maybe go for another run to clear her head, despite having already exercised that day. Maggie gently warned her not to overdo it, but both women knew that jogging was Sydney's way of finding peace. The warm weather called to her, and the familiar roads around Grubbs felt as safe as her own backyard. They exchanged I love yous, and Sydney left, heading home to prepare. She strapped on her Apple Watch, laced up her running shoes, and set out into the afternoon heat. Around 2:30 that afternoon, a UPS driver traveling along State Highway 18 between Newport and Grubbs noticed a young woman jogging. The roads out there were desolate, few cars, scattered farmhouses, miles of open land. Seeing anyone on foot was memorable, simply because it was so unusual. The driver would later tell investigators he remembered Sydney clearly for that reason. She appeared completely fine, running at a steady pace with no signs of distress. But Sydney never came home. When her boyfriend realized hours had passed without any contact, alarm bells immediately sounded. Sydney wasn't someone who went silent. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her Snapchat messages sat unopened. Text messages received no replies. This wasn't forgetfulness or a dead battery. Something was terribly wrong. By nightfall, panic had fully set in.
Search for a missing Jackson County woman involving multiple law enforcement agencies now, and it continues. 25-year-old Sydney Sutherland was last seen jogging off Highway 18. Here's her photograph. She was jogging between Newport and Grubbs. Claire Kreis has been in Jackson County all day. She's joining us now with the latest on the search efforts there. Claire, what do we know about the search? How's it going? Has it turned up anything?
Yeah, Bob, County Road 41 is the last place Sydney Sutherland was seen. This is actually a typical jogging route for her. Now it's filled, you can see, filled with people driving up and down, searching, trying to bring her back home safe. From the sky to boots on the ground, law enforcement from across the county and even the state are exhausting every option to find 25-year-old Sydney Sutherland.
We're working every aspect that we can think of.
According to Jackson County Sheriff David Lucas, Sutherland was last seen around 2:30 on this county road near her home.
She was on foot, out walking and jogging. We received that information from a UPS driver this morning that saw her.
Since then, no one has heard from her, and no one knows what happened to her.
We're not ruling anything out.
Lucas says she did have her phone, and they've tried to track its last known location.
With the phone pings that we've been getting from AT&T, plus the information from the people that said they saw her, it's pretty much going to be in that general area, and that's where we're concentrating the most right now.
It's not just police and sheriff deputies searching the fields for anything out of the ordinary.
Where somebody might have turned around out in a field with a truck or backed up in it, weeds that are rolled over.
Hoyt Brown is helping with the search efforts on his day off.
It's helping people when they need help.
He says he can't believe something like this happened in this small rural community.
I was kind of shocked.
Now he just hopes his and all the other volunteers' efforts break some ground on Sutherland's disappearance. So this area behind me is actually the staging area for the search. Sheriff Lucas says there are no solid leads at this time. So we ask if you know anything or if you have seen her or even think that you have seen her to please call the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Reporting live in Jackson County.
By 7 the following morning, roughly 300 volunteers had joined law enforcement, combing through fields, checking ditches, searching anywhere Sydney might have fallen or been taken. Within hours of Sydney's disappearance, searchers located her iPhone about 1.25 miles from her home, lying in a field. The phone wasn't damaged, it had been discarded. Nearby, investigators discovered a pair of broken sunglasses that belonged to Sydney. During a brief rest from searching, Maggie spoke with a local farmer named Quake Llewellyn. He'd attended the same small high school as Sydney, just a couple years ahead of her. He told Maggie he'd seen Sydney jogging that afternoon, but noticed nothing unusual. She wasn't injured, no one was following her, everything seemed normal. What Maggie couldn't have known in that moment was that she was speaking to her daughter's killer. For 2 days, the community searched relentlessly. Maggie crawled on her hands and knees along roadsides, desperate for any clue. At one point, she discovered a small white bead pressed into the dirt. She instantly recognized it as part of a bracelet Sydney wore. That tiny piece of jewelry represented both hope and heartbreak. On August 21st, investigators announced they were pursuing several leads.
10 o'clock, everybody. I'm Bob Clausen. A suspect is in custody in the case of a missing jogger in Jackson County.
That afternoon, everything changed. Authorities arrested a suspect and transported him to Jackson County Jail, though his identity wasn't immediately released. Hours later came the devastating confirmation.
Tonight, a heartbreaking ending for a search for a missing Jackson County woman. The Jackson County Sheriff confirming the body of 25-year-old Sydney Sutherland has been found.
The medical examiner determined she died from multiple blunt force injuries. This was now a homicide investigation. The arrested suspect was 28-year-old Quake Llewellyn, the same farmer who'd told Maggie he'd seen Sydney jogging. The revelation sent shockwaves through Grubbs.
Walked over to him and I said, Quake, can you tell me anything? What was Sydney doing? You know, did you see anything unusual? Did you meet anybody unusual? He goes, no, she was just running. I said, you don't have anything you can tell me? No, she was just running. He just kind of gave me a little hug.
He gave you a hug.
Gave me a hug.
What did that feel like in that moment?
It was something felt odd. I walked back over to the group and I was like, something's wrong.
Llewellyn wasn't a stranger or an outsider. His family had deep roots in Jackson County. The Llewellyn family had been named Jackson County Farm Family of the Year in 2016, operating nearly 6,000 acres across multiple counties through 3 generations. Quake himself managed his own farming operation, having started with his father's help after graduating from Tuckerman High School in 2010. But Quake had done more than simply claim to have seen Sydney. He'd joined the Facebook group created to coordinate the search for her. He'd participated in search parties. He'd offered comfort to her family. Investigators discovered that Sydney and Quake had been Facebook friends, though Llewellyn had recently unfriended her before her death. They'd attended the same tiny high school in Tuckerman, where graduating classes typically numbered fewer than 50 students. While Quake initially told investigators he barely knew Sydney, this turned out to be false. Quake had actually inserted himself into the investigation early by walking into the police station and stating he might have been the last person to see Sydney alive. This bold move raised suspicions. When investigators requested permission to search his pickup truck, both Quake and his father consented. What officers found was damning, blood smeared on the tailgate. Cell phone data placed Llewellyn in the exact area where Sydney's phone was discovered, and her body was found mere footsteps from a location pinged by his GPS. Surveillance footage from his own property showed him leaving in his truck and returning later with visible damage to the vehicle. During questioning on August 21st, Quake's story began to crumble. He eventually admitted he'd struck Sydney with his pickup truck, loaded her into the vehicle, drove her to nearby farmland, and sexually assaulted her on the truck's tailgate before using a shovel to dig a grave and bury her body. He claimed the initial impact was accidental, that dust had obscured his vision. But investigators didn't believe this version of events. Arkansas State Police presented evidence suggesting Llewellyn had been driving westbound when he spotted Sydney, deliberately turned his vehicle around, and intentionally struck her. Court documents would later detail how he'd rammed her with his pickup before abducting, raping, and burying her. Quake directed investigators to his mother's house, where he'd placed the clothing he wore during the murder in a laundry basket. Perhaps most chilling was what Quake told a psychologist during his mental competency evaluation. He admitted that after burying Sydney, he simply went back to work, ate dinner at home, and went to bed. He tried to forget about it and returned to his normal routine the next day, as if nothing had happened. Quake was formally charged with capital murder, rape, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. He entered a plea of not guilty. At the time of Sydney's murder, Llewellyn was married and living with his wife and 3 stepchildren. His wife quickly filed for divorce and cooperated fully with law enforcement. Authorities confirmed she had no knowledge of her husband's crime and no involvement whatsoever. One anonymous source came forward claiming Quake had a disturbing history that many in the community knew about, but had never been formally addressed. Allegations surfaced of him peering into women's windows, stalking younger girls he'd become fixated on, and harming animals in ways too disturbing to detail. These claims, if true, painted a picture of someone whose violent tendencies had been escalating for years. Sydney's funeral drew an overwhelming crowd of mourners. So many people wanted to pay their respects that the service was live-streamed to accommodate everyone. The entire community wore pink, Sydney's favorite color, as a tribute to the young woman whose light had been extinguished far too soon. As the case moved toward trial, Llewellyn's defense attorneys argued that the crime was a horrible accident and nothing about it was intentional, but prosecutors saw it differently. They'd made clear that if a jury convicted Llewellyn of capital murder, they would absolutely seek the death penalty. The case generated such intense media coverage that Llewellyn's trial venue had to be moved from Jackson County to neighboring Lawrence County to ensure an impartial jury could be seated. The publicity was unlike anything most Arkansas legal professionals had ever witnessed. Ultimately, prosecutors approached Sydney's family about a plea agreement. The decision wasn't easy, but the Sutherlands agreed. They would accept life imprisonment without parole in exchange for avoiding the emotional toll of a lengthy trial and the uncertainty of jury deliberations. The kidnapping and abuse of corpse charges would be dismissed, and the death penalty would be taken off the table. On October 1, 2021, more than 13 months after Sydney's murder, Quake Llewellyn stood in a Newport courtroom and pleaded guilty to capital murder and rape. He waived his right to a jury trial and was immediately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was packed with people wearing pink in Sydney's honour. When it came time for victim impact statements, Maggie Sutherland addressed her daughter's killer directly. She reportedly called him Satan. She asked him to look her in the eyes, then posed questions that would haunt any parent. Did she fight you? Did she cry? Did she ask for her brothers? Maggie told Llewellyn that Sydney was not his to take. She spoke of how the hands he'd used to hug her during the search were the same hands that had killed her daughter. She acknowledged that true justice would mean having Sydney back, something no courtroom could provide. She told him she took some small comfort knowing that from that day forward, he would be known only as a number with no name. The community of Grubbs refused to let Sydney's memory fade. Annual events were organised in her honour, most notably Finish Sydney's Run, where participants complete the route she never got to finish. Runners across Arkansas and beyond have taken up the challenge, wearing pink and sharing stories about Sydney on social media, ensuring her spirit continues to inspire others. The overpass where Highway 67 and State Highway 167 intersect near County Road 41, the area where Sydney was last seen, was renamed the Sydney Sutherland Memorial Overpass. It stands as a permanent reminder of her life and the senseless way it ended. That small white bead Maggie found during the search now lives on a bracelet around her wrist, a tangible connection to the daughter she lost.